Is very good. I'd like to welcome everybody to the 2022 Measure T Renewal Investment Plan Steering Committee meeting. Today is May 5th, 2022. This is Zoom meeting number 12. So what we'd like to do is to go ahead and start off with protocols like we've done in the past. So Georgina, would you like to go ahead and lead that effort?
Sure. So simultaneous Spanish interpretation is available for today's webinar. To join interpretation mode, please select the icon that looks like a globe at the bottom of the screen, select Spanish, and mute original audio. We ask that all participants choose a preferred audio channel, either English or Spanish. If your preferred language is Spanish and you wish to provide comments in Spanish during either of the public comment periods, we ask that you please do so from the Spanish interpretation audio channel. This is a working group meeting with limited time to address a full agenda. Please keep comments concise and to the point to allow all participants equal opportunity to speak. Our co-chairs and facilitator are here to help us stay on track and ensure that all voices are heard. So at this time, we'll give all of those that wish to switch to the Spanish channel an opportunity to do that. And so if Linguistica would like to read this as well, that would be great. Can you read this in Spanish, please?
I think she says I can't in the chat.
Okay.
I'm already in the Spanish channel.
Okay, she should have waited. All right, we'll move on. Microphones will be automatically muted. Video will be off for public attendees. Video will remain off for public attendees even while speaking. Post general questions in the Q&A box. Use the raise hand function to direct a question to the speaker or the steering committee. For attendees that joined by phone, *9 is the raise hand function. Phone callers, please use *6 to unmute and mute yourself, not the mute function on your phone. There will be a public comment period at the end of the agenda. If you plan to comment, add your name, agency, and subject matter to the Q&A box. When called upon to speak, staff will unmute your microphone. State your name, agency, organization, or special interest group if applicable. All speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. Staff will announce when your time is up and disable your microphone when your time is up. There are 2 opportunities for public comment during today's steering committee meeting. At the beginning of the meeting during agenda item 2, public comment related to items on the agenda, and during agenda item 7, public comment related to items not on the agenda. If you have comments related to specific projects within neighborhoods or communities, such as desiring a roundabout at an intersection or the extension of transit service in the City of Madera or Chowchilla, please direct your comments to the City of Madera or Chowchilla staff. If the specific project is outside of the City of Madera or Chowchilla, please direct your comments to county staff. MCTC is working on the Regional Transportation Plan and will also accept project-specific comments and forward the comment to the responsible agencies. The steering committee will be addressing major regional transportation projects along state highways and other major arterials that connect the cities and unincorporated communities, not specific project needs. The steering committee is a working group responsible for development of the Measure T Renewal Investment Plan. The steering committee will ultimately recommend approval of the plan to the Madera County Transportation Authority. It is the MCTA board that will take action to approve the plan and request that the Board of Supervisors place the ballot measure on the November 2022 ballot. With that, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Great job. So let's go ahead, and before we go to our first action item, which would be the approval of the meeting minutes for April 28, 2022, let's go ahead and start with introductions. And Georgina, I believe your team leads that effort as well.
Yes, if we could go directly to the public opinion poll, because the pollster only has a limited amount of time with us today, and then we can come back to introductions and the minutes, please.
Let's do it. Thank you.
So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim McLarney and to TBWBH staff to review the opinion poll results that were taken recently within Madera County. Tim?
Great. Thank you, Georgina.
And I'll
And
stop sharing and let you share.
great. And thank you, Georgina, and to members of the steering committee. Let me go ahead and pull my screen up here. So everybody got that?
Yes.
Okay. So today what I've done is prepared a PowerPoint presentation I'll share with you, which covers the key results and findings of the tracking survey that we recently completed. And as I go through this presentation, if we have questions or comments, I'll take them at the appropriate time, whatever the co-chairs decide. Let me go ahead and click this. Okay. So before we actually talk about the survey results, it's helpful to talk a little bit about the purpose of the study. You may recall that back in August of 2021, so about 9 months ago, we conducted a baseline survey to explore voters' opinions about a potential Measure T renewal. And it was a good opportunity at that point and in that time to gauge their level of interest in supporting a renewal and also understand what their priorities are and were at the time for how they would like to see the funds of a renewal measure spent. A lot has happened since August 2021, right? We have the Ukraine war and what that's done to gas prices. Although on the positive side, the pandemic is in a better position now than we were, say, 9 months ago. We also still have a lot of the supply chain problems and kind of a hangover from that on our economy. And then obviously, runaway inflation is a topic that is sort of top of mind for a lot of voters. And so in some ways, the political weather isn't quite as good today as it was 9 months ago. And so this tracking survey is an opportunity for us to get an up-to-date view of how voters view a Measure T renewal and to get some sense as to whether or not these changing sort of macro level conditions have impacted voters' opinions about a Measure T renewal. It's also an opportunity for us to sort of confirm voters' priorities with respect to the types of projects and services that they'd like to fund with a Measure T renewal. We had a pretty clear breakdown from the original baseline poll, but now we have a new sample of people and a new snapshot in time. And we get to kind of see, are we seeing the same basic priorities we saw before? And obviously that can help shape the expenditure plan that you put together for Measure T. And then finally, it's an opportunity for us to kind of understand and gather information that's going to be needed for communications related to a Measure T renewal moving forward. So in terms of the methodology, the tracking study is very similar to what we did for the baseline survey back in August. We conducted the survey in April of this year. I normally don't dwell too much on that time frame, but again, pretty recent time, which means baked into these results are all the discussions we've had nationally about inflation, all of the gas price hikes that people have been experiencing, since Ukraine was invaded by Russia, and anything else that's happened within the last month, actually up till about 2 weeks ago. Those events are baked into these results. And so that's important because every once in a while you do a survey like this and you're out of the field and then something big happens, right? And that the survey results don't necessarily, reflect or incorporate the impacts of that event. Here, all the big things happen prior to our data collection. We wound up speaking with 572 voters who are what we call likely November 2022 voters. These are voters who we expect will actually be casting a ballot this upcoming November. We use what's called a stratified and clustered random sampling design. And what that ensures is that at the end of this data collection process, the 572 voters that we have spoken to, they represent accurately the profile of the likely November 2022 universe in your county on all the dimensions that are related to voting behavior. So for example, if I know that 5% of the likely November electorate are Democratic females who live with another Democrat or between 50 and 60 years of age and live in a particular supervisorial district, we make sure that 5% of the sample has clusters that represent that profile. And that's what allows us at the end of this process to have a sample that is perfectly representative of that likely November universe. We recruited using 3 methods: email, text, and telephone. We gave folks the option, if they were randomly selected for the survey, to participate by phone or online at a protected website. conducted in English and Spanish. And now, because this was a random sample of 572 and not a census of all of your likely November voters, it has what's known as a margin of error due to sampling. In this case, that's plus or minus 4.1%. What that means is we can be 95% confident that the results we'll talk about today are within 4% of what we would have found had we spoken with all of your likely voters. Okay, so on to the results. At the outset, we start the interview off by asking individuals to tell us how important each of the issues you see here on the slide are to them. Would they say it's extremely important or very important, which are those dark blue and medium blue bars respectively, somewhat important and not at all important. These are asked in a random order, but we have sorted them from high to low based on that combined percentage of folks who said either extremely or very important, and that combined percentage is shown in the box off to the right. We asked this question really for two reasons. One, it's just a nice warm-up question, kind of gets folks into the groove of taking the survey, gets them thinking about local issues. But it is also an opportunity for us to understand how transportation-related issues, things that might be funded by a Measure T renewal, how do these issues stack up in importance relative to some of these other issues that may also compete for tax dollars? And in particular, how do transportation-related issues stack up against that issue of preventing local tax increases? And what you see is the number one issue overall was improving the maintenance of local streets and roads at 88%, extremely very important, followed by improving the economy, improving public safety, maintaining local infrastructure on down. Preventing local tax increases checked in at 68%. And so if you look at kind of the gap in importance between the very top issue of improving the maintenance of local streets and roads at 88 and preventing local tax increases at 68, there's about a 20-point gap. That gap is actually the same as it was in the August 2021 survey. And so the relative ranking of issues is pretty similar. And in particular, that gap between that top sort of top project that we know voters care the most about as far as a Measure T renewal and that preventing local taxes item, that gap is maintained the same. So despite the changing environment, those numbers look very similar to what they were in 2021. So from here, we get right to that initial ballot test. And the idea is before we get any deeper into the interview and we start talking in more detail about the projects that could be funded or arguments pro and con related to a Measure T renewal, we want to present to them a mock-up of what we think that 75-word ballot statement could look like and get their reaction. The initial ballot test is a really good gauge of where your voters are at on the natural in the current environment with respect to this proposal. So the wording you see on this slide is exactly the wording we shared with voters. If you go down kind of towards the bottom there, you're going to see some red markers here. What this indicates is that, like we did in the baseline poll, we use what's called a split sample to test two different versions of the survey. Half of the sample received a version that read until ended by voters. So this would have no sunset on this measure. The other half received a version that had for 30 years. So it would have a 30-year duration. And so keep that split in mind because all the ballot tests are shown separately for the two versions. So here's the language we tested, and here are the results. So at that initial ballot test, we had 76% of folks who said that they would support the version where the duration was until ended by voters. You had 77% who would support the version where the duration was set at 30 years. So only a 1% difference overall between those two, and that is not statistically significant. This is consistent, interestingly enough, with what we saw in 2021, that there was really no significant difference in terms of how voters viewed the two durations with the measure. And that's actually pretty typical to what we find when you look at revenue measures, that for the most part, voters care about what it's going to fund and how much it's going to cost. They tend not to care as much about duration. And also, just to note that the findings we're seeing here in this tracking survey are actually, if you average them all out, are about 1 point higher than what we found in August 2021. And so that's encouraging, right? Despite the fact that we've had some storm clouds blow in over the last 9 months in terms of inflation, in terms of high gas prices, in terms of the war in Ukraine, creating a lot of uncertainty for where our economy is going, we're not seeing a drop in voters' initial reactions to this Measure T renewal proposal. So at this point in the poll, we switch over to what we call our projects and services section. And the idea here is twofold. One is we are going to now start to educate this respondent more about what a Measure T renewal would accomplish. Up until this point, we only had the 75-word ballot statement to describe what Measure T can do, pretty constraining. Here you get to unpack it into all these different types of potential projects. And in that way, they're getting a much better idea of what Measure T would accomplish. The other thing it allows us to do is understand of all the things you can spend the money on, which of these sort of rise to the top of the list in terms of voters' priorities. So what you see here, interestingly enough, I don't have the comparison to 2021 in a visual format, but I've gone back and looked at how the rankings compare here to what we saw in 2021, and you're just seeing a lot of similarities. The priorities haven't changed much. Paving and maintaining local streets and roads and fixing potholes at the top of the list this time, was at the top of the list before. I'm going to skip over these for a second. Adding passing lanes and improving highway interchanges to improve safety, reduce head-on collisions. Also very popular. Retrofitting, replacing old bridges, widening, adding lanes and widening congested roads and highways where possible, et cetera. A lot of these are countywide projects that are appearing on this sort of top tier of projects that voters indicated they see as being kind of the priorities for a Measure T renewal. They're the same as we saw back in August 2021. When you see these longer descriptions here, like complete projects in area, reducing traffic congestion, maintenance improvements along Avenue 12, 17, Cleveland, Sunset, et cetera. When you see these are bundles of projects that were specific to a particular supervisorial district, because we just wanted to see, hey, if you localize these projects more to an area, how do they test? And as you can see, these localized projects tend to test quite well also. So that's the top tier. Here's the second tier. As you go down, you see that the level of sort of interest or favorability for some of these projects starts to wane. And when you get towards the bottom of the list, what you see here, consistent with what we saw before, this is your sort of your active transportation, bikes, pedestrian improvements, ride sharing, transit, and we have one that's an environmental mitigation item here. It isn't that voters don't want to see these things. You can see that we still have, favorability ratings for all but the lowest one here, over 60%. It's just that when you stack it up against all the other things that Measure T can do, these ones fall down into sort of a lower priority tier than what we're seeing for the other projects. So now, if the board was ultimately to place a Measure T renewal on the November ballot, there is going to be an election cycle. And during that election cycle, there's going to be a lot of discussion and debate in the county about this proposal. There's going to be folks that will step up and advocate on behalf of this measure and argue to their friends and their neighbors about why this is needed and why they should vote yes. You might also have some opponents, right, who step up and say, this is a bad idea, we shouldn't be doing this, and here's why. For this to be a reliable gauge of the feasibility of a Measure T renewal, we need to be able to sort of simulate that discussion and debate in the space of the poll so that we have a good understanding not only of where your voters are today on the natural, which was that initial ballot test I already shared with you, but what happens after they're exposed to both positive and negative arguments. And so we do that first by testing positive arguments. And so for each of the arguments you see here on this slide, we simply say, supporters of the measure say blank, you insert a positive argument. Do you think this is a very convincing, somewhat convincing, or not at all convincing reason to support the measure? And you can see here that there's a lot of positive arguments that get traction. The very top of the list is an argument where we describe that Madera's county's population has nearly doubled during the past 30 years, and experts forecast that it will continue to grow at a fast rate. We need to continue improving our local highways, interchanges, and major streets to keep up with this growth, avoid gridlock, and protect our quality of life. Number two is just the idea that all the money stays local, right? None of this money can be taken away by the state or used for other purposes. And the third item on there is that, if this measure is renewed by voters, the county's going to qualify for about $600 million in additional state and federal matching funds to make priority repairs and transportation improvements in the county, and that without a local measure, you're not going to get your fair share of state and federal funding. So those were the top positive arguments. Now, at this point in the poll, voters have heard more about this proposal than they did in that initial ballot test, because we got to talk in more detail about the projects that would be funded. We got to share with them positive arguments on behalf of the measure. And so we circle back with what we call our interim ballot test. We present that same 75-word ballot statement again and say, where do you stand? And what you see here is that at the interim ballot test, we're now checking in at 78% for the no sunset version. We're at 80% for the duration of 30 years version. This is right in line with where we were back in August 2021, where on average we had 79% support for the proposal. And so not much in the way of changes to this point in the poll. And then we get to the negatives. And the idea behind the negatives is I'm going to put my opponent hat on, right? I'm going to anticipate what opponents of this measure may say. And I'm going to pepper respondents with a series of negative arguments. And I'm doing this because I want to understand how resilient voter support is for Measure T renewal, right? What if we pressure test voter support by conveying all these reasons for why they should vote no, right? And so you can see here, if you toggle back and forth, the positive arguments tend to resonate at a higher level than the negatives, but there are some negatives that, get a bit of traction. So, for example, the top one is just your basic government waste argument, right? That resonates with some voters, and that we shouldn't reward government for being wasteful by voting to increase our taxes. They already have all the money they need. They just need to be more efficient in how they spend it. So I'm sure you've probably heard a few people say that, sort of the general government is wasteful argument out there. Number two is, an argument related to the pandemic, and that this is just not a good time, right? People are struggling. You've also got inflation and high gas prices. This is not a time to be considering raising taxes. So you can see that, we test a series of these negative arguments. Some of them get traction. The real question is what happens afterwards. And that is the final ballot test. So we circle back after those negatives. We present that same 75-word statement, and we ask, where do you stand today? And what you see is that the negative arguments do get some traction. On the left side, the until ended by voters version, we went from 78% at the interim ballot test. It drops us to 68% at the final ballot test. On the right, the 30-year duration, we go from 80% down to 71%. And so healthy little chunk of support that falls away when you give the opposition as much voice as we did in this poll to try and convince voters as to reasons they would vote no. That said, even after what was a pretty hard pressure test, both of these final ballot tests are north of the 66.7% we would need to be successful, right? So that's encouraging, right? It doesn't drop you below the 2/3. It just gets you probably a little uncomfortably close. So, what's interesting about these results, when you compare to 2021, voters were a little more resilient in that poll in August than they are here. They landed at the end in that survey down around 72%. And so they just, instead of on average about 69%. So on average about 3 points higher in August. And so when you consider again the environment that we're in now with inflation and gas prices and the war in Ukraine, these are what I would call sort of conditioning factors. They aren't dissuading your voters at the outset, at that initial ballot test. But when you kind of 1-2 punch them with that environment, and then you add on these negatives, the negatives are getting a bit more traction this time than they were back in August of 2021. But again, good news is we're still north of the 2/3. All right, so what does all this mean? I got a couple wrap-up slides here. The first thing I'm gonna do is circle back to that overarching question I mentioned at the outset. Is one of the reasons why we do this type of research, is to understand, is a Measure T renewal feasible? If the board were to choose to place it on the ballot, does it have a reasonable chance of success? I think, like the conclusion of August 2021 baseline survey, this tracking survey done in April here comes to the same conclusion, that yes, a Measure T renewal measure is feasible. A lot of the things that we want to see in place for a measure to be feasible, we found here. We saw that these transportation related items continue to stack up kind of toward the top of the list of the things that voters find to be the most important issues facing the county. That translated into very solid national support for a renewal measure right out of the gates. We had 76 and 77% of voters telling us that they would support these proposals depending on the duration. all the projects and services we tested were popular, particularly those around, maintaining infrastructure and safety. Strong positive arguments, right? By the interim ballot test, on average, we had actually raised support up to 79% for the proposal. And importantly, at each point in the survey that we circle back to respondents and we said, now that you've heard a bit more about this proposal, where do you stand? At every one of those ballot tests, the support levels are north of the 2/3 mark that is needed to be successful. And that's even with, testing, after testing negative arguments. So that's all good news. That all tells us that, yes, looking ahead, that we think that a Measure T renewal measure has a solid chance of being successful on the November ballot. Now, that said, always important to keep in mind that a poll like this is a snapshot in time. It is not a crystal ball, right? It is not looking forward to election day saying you're going to get 76% on election day. It's telling you where your voters are today, gives us an idea how they're likely to react to the information they could encounter during the election cycle. But ultimately, what happens on election day isn't dictated by what your poll says today. It's dictated by everything that happens from this point forward. And so that's a reminder that, we got to be making smart decisions about how you structure a Measure T renewal measure so that it's consistent with what your voters have told you their priorities are with respect to how these funds will be spent. And it's really important that you put the work in, right? That you get out and you continue to engage with the community. You continue to have these conversations about a Measure T renewal so that people have a better understanding of how important Measure T has been to the county's transportation system to date. And that, without actually increasing the tax rate, you can renew this measure. And obviously that's going to translate into a lot of future benefits to the county down the line. And so, both in terms of publicly funded communications, that's going to be important in terms of continuing to build a consensus around this proposal. And then ultimately, obviously, you're going to have an independent campaign that can carry the ball forward during the election cycle and advocate on behalf of this measure during a time when there's going to be a lot of other things, vying for voters' attention, and potentially some sort of cross-cutting issues and anti-tax measures that may also share the November ballot. So with that, let me stop. That's the end of my presentation. I do welcome questions from the committee.
Very good. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. It looks like we have a hand up. Frank Simonis.
Tim, I have a question on how you do the polling. Historically, the way the county is set up, we have the mountains and we have the valley, which are two distinct communities that make up our county. Mm-hmm. The mountain is District 5, and on a midterm election year is on average 58.5% total voter participation of the entire election. We've been redistricted since the 10-year census, and we grew, and the new numbers look like it would be 61.8% total voter participation this time around on a midterm year. It's about 3 to 3.5% less on a primary year for president. Mm-hmm. You take this into consideration when you are polling people, because the mountains is a very different mindset than the valley in general. There's a lot more retirees in the mountains, mm-hmm. and more of a conservative minded group of people up here, about 2/3 that way. And it matters because it will skew your results. I was just wondering.
That's a great question. And the short answer is yes, we do take it into consideration. I mentioned at the outset, I kind of breezed by it, but I talked about stratified and clustered random sampling. What that essentially means is we start out with that voter file and we identify people who we expect to be likely November 2022 voters, meaning based on when they registered to vote in the county, what elections they've actually participated in versus not, and some other demographics. We think this is somebody who's actually going to participate. They're going to cast a ballot in November 2022. Once we isolate those likely voters, we then break that voter file down by a series of different dimensions that we know are related to how people vote. So things like age, things like gender, things like partisanship, things like household party type, right? All of these variables that we know, and particularly household party type, are strong predictors of how people tend to view tax measures. We break it down. We also add geography to that. So, and in your case, some of the questions we have are geared specifically to certain supervisorial districts, right? When we had those combos of projects I mentioned, we didn't ask those combos of everybody. We would take a combo of projects that's specific to District 5, for example, and give it only to District 5 voters, right? Votes in District 4 would get District 4 specific projects. And so we take all that in consideration when we're building our samples, so that once we've stratified it that way, we build clusters that represent these multi-dimensional profiles, and then we randomly pick people into their appropriate clusters. So that's how we're able to maintain the right balance. So to your question, we did not underestimate or underrepresent District 5 voters in this sample, nor did we overstate their influence, right? We have their proportions to match what we expect their proportions to be of the November electorate. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Tim. Are there any other questions? If not, thank you so much, Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you. And I appreciate you front loading this in your meeting. And I apologize I just had another meeting that I have to drive to. So
Thanks, Tim.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much. Great
Gotcha.
job.
Excellent. Appreciate it. Okay, well, let's go ahead and go back to item number 1, and let's go through for introductions before we approve the meeting minutes for April 28th.
Jeff, can you read the roll call, please?
Sure. Madera Chamber of Commerce, Debbie Bray. MVP Realty, John Reed. Red Barn Cafe owner, Lisa Soroyan. Visit Yosemite, Madera County, Rhonda Salisbury.
I'm here.
City of Chowchilla, Council Member Palmer.
I'm here.
City of Chowchilla, Rod Pruitt.
I'm here.
It looks like John Reed is here as well.
Okay, thank you. City of Chowchilla, Jason Rogers.
Here.
City of Madera, Councilmember Rodriguez. City of Madera, Mayor Garcia.
Here.
City of Madera, Arnoldo Rodriguez.
Here.
City of Madera, Keith Helmuth.
Here.
City of Madera, Ellen Bitter.
Here.
City of Madera, David Huff. Valley Children's Hospital, Tim Curley.
I'm here.
Madera County Public Health Department, Stephanie Nathan.
Here.
Madera County Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Frazier.
Here.
Madera County Board of Supervisors, District 3, Supervisor Poitras.
Yes.
Madera County Board of Supervisors, Jay Varney. Madera County Planning Department, Matt Treber.
Here.
Madera County Public Works Department, Jared Carter.
Here.
Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, Leticia Casillas LeQuinn. Madeline Harris. Camarina Health Center, Paulo Soares. Camarina Health Center, Nicole Mosqueda.
Here.
Madera County Farm Bureau, Christina Beckstead.
Here.
Creekside Farming, Defender Mahill.
Here.
Madera County Superintendent of Schools, Opie Rare. Madera County or Community College, Dr. Angel Reyna. Cal Fire, Matt Watson.
Here.
California Department of Transportation, Michael Navarro. David Padilla. Building Industry Association of Fresno and Madera Counties, Michael Prandini.
Is it not Michael Lopez?
Central California Labor Council, I have Mike Lopez.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Michael Prandini. Madera County Economic Development Commission, Bobby Kahn.
Yes.
T-HIP IT, Chapter of the Sierra Club, Bill Gilbo.
Tehipity chapter.
Tehipity. Bill. MCTA, Patricia Taylor.
Here.
Central California Labor Council, Chuck Rojas. Social Service Transportation Advisory Council, Frank Simonis.
Present.
Active Transportation Advocate, Jeffrey Wheeler. Active Transportation Advocate, Conrad Gaunt. San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, Dan Levitt. Student Representative from Madera Community College, Jonathan Stormer. Citizen Community Advocate, Derek Robinson. Citizen Community Advocate, Donald Hawley. Is there anybody I missed?
All right, very good. Thank you very much.
John Reed has his hand up.
John, was that just to let everybody know you're here? Apparently so. So Michael Prandini, looks like you're here.
Correct. I put him in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you guys got my yes. I'm
Hello.
slow checking in.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Is
Hello.
that
Can
you?
you? Yes,
Yeah.
this is John Reed. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I've been driving along here trying to hit *6 and *9 and not having any luck with that. And so finally, I think Georgina just unmuted me. So I had a question for our consultant before he left, but unfortunately, I guess I probably missed it. But what he did not discuss was any kind of a budget or committee or activities specific to getting the ordinance passed. If we don't do anything, I don't think it has a chance of passing, and that's obviously not going to happen. But we did not discuss what kind of budget is going to be required to pass this ordinance and what kind of organization is going to take to do that. And it seems to me that unless we start talking very soon about marketing and specifics to marketing, like budget and formation of the committee and how it's and various duties, that we're going to be behind the curve. And I think that needs to be added to the agenda.
You know, John, thank you so much for that that comment. And actually, things are in the works, and we'll be contacting you very soon to help out in that particular effort. Unfortunately, we can't talk about fundraising specifically in this for the campaign in this meeting. We can talk about public awareness. But that's something that's a after hours thing, but there are things in the works, and staff has taken note of your concern. It is very valid, and thank you. And we will be contacting you shortly because your help will be needed.
All right, thank you.
Certainly. Okay, if there's no other questions or comments, let's go ahead and move on to approval, or at least taking action on the meeting minutes for April 28, 2022.
Yes, Supervisor, they're still in draft form, so they will be presented at the next meeting.
Okay, very good. Well, that was easy. So let's move on to item number 2, and that would be a public comment related to items on the agenda. Okay, seeing none. Let's go ahead and move on to item 4. That would be the Measure T Renewal Regional Program project listing.
Yes. So as you recall, we have 4 different programs that have been approved by this committee and allocations to each one of those programs. Under the first program, Community and Neighborhood Streets and Roads, we have 4 sub-programs. We have the Local Neighborhood and Street and Road Maintenance Program or sub-program, the Local Road Improvements sub-program, the Flexible sub-program, and then the Regional Streets, Roads, and Highways sub-program. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is the Regional Streets, Roads, and Highways sub-program. So as you recall, at the last meeting, there was an allocation that was made, proposal by the local agencies, and it was upheld by this steering committee, with 62.5% of the measure renewal going to the Community and Neighborhood program, 35% of it going to maintenance sub-program, 15% to local streets, roads sub-program, 12.5% to flexible, and then an additional 25% going to the regional sub-program, for a total of approximately $216,500,000 over a 30-year period. These are all 30-year numbers. So we also provided you with a to-do list, what needed to happen next. Those next steps included compiling the list of projects, which we have done, and we had shown you that list of projects at the last meeting. We also looked at determining other available funding sources for those projects, which we have worked with the local agencies on, and then determining a short list of projects viable within the next 10 to 15-year period. And we're really focusing on a 10-year period at this point. So going to the table of projects, and I'll do that now. I have to back out of this because I couldn't put in the PowerPoint. It's a big list. We have developed, together with the local agencies and with MCTC staff who is working on the regional transportation plan, a list of projects along the regional system. They're considered regional routes of significance within Madera County. And they include routes, of course, all the state routes and any projects on those state routes. They also include a number of other major facilities that provide connectivity between the different communities, whether they're incorporated, unincorporated. And they also are addressing safety issues, capacity issues, access for other modes of transportation, et cetera. So we have facilities such as Robertson and Washington Road Roundabout, that's on the state highway, Avenue 13, Cleveland Avenue, D Street, Ellis Street. These are all located within the city of Madera and Chowchilla. Then we have a number of bridges in the city of Madera that need improvement. And then we get out to the rural area. In the Ranchos area, we're looking at Avenue 9, Avenue 12. As we get up into the mountain area, we are looking at Road 206, and then east of Madera and west of Madera, Road 23 and Road 29.
When I went
There are
there,
a number of different facilities throughout the county.
They had the bottle still, I guess, so they're pouring from bottle, but
And Michael, you
Mike.
probably-
Yeah, there you
Michael,
go.
you need to mute, and Brett, sorry.
Oh, I was just telling Michael to mute.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
So they're located throughout the entire county, and I think that's something that is important. So we work with the local agencies. You can see the agency name is here, the route, the location, the segments, in other words, the description of what the project is actually going to do. You can see 3 lanes to 4 lanes. You can see reconstructing, providing for an interchange, all the different types of activities that are noted as these regional facilities would be implemented. The opening year for these facilities, they're all noted. I think we only have a couple of gaps. We have a missing year here in yellow and another one at the bottom. We also have the cost of the project. These project costs are going to have to be checked thoroughly with the local agencies to make sure that given the year of implementation that they have been inflated or there's a growth rate that's applied so that we don't run short of Measure T dollars or other funding to actually deliver the project when it's going to come on board. Other funding available has been identified by the local agencies. So you can see here, we're looking at approximately $1.6 billion worth of projects. We have about over $1 billion coming in from other funding sources. That would include impact fees that are enacted by the jurisdictions or from federal or state funding sources for projects. So leaving approximately 500 and 600 million that is potentially could be attributable to Measure T dollars. Of course, as you know, as we noted in the PowerPoint, we only have 216 million over a 30-year period to apply to these projects. So we have to be very careful about how we decide which projects make the most sense moving forward over time and within the short-term period, 10 to 15 years. So in working with the local agencies, we looked at what are those projects that are geographically equitable, that would provide mobility enhancement for the area within the mountain area, northeast Madera County, along the 41 corridor in the Rio Mesa area, also in the Ranchos area, as well as in the city of Madera, as well as in the city of Chowchilla. And what are those projects that in the short term could be delivered, would have some funding associated with them, and we could tell the voters would be available for them to use within the next 10 years, 10 to 15 years. And so working with each of those local jurisdictions, we identified these projects that are in blue. In this case, it's the city of Chowchilla, Caltrans project, the State Route 99 233 bridge. That's a bridge with pedestrian improvements over State Route 99 in Chowchilla with improvements to roundabouts in that vicinity. We also have identified, let me see, was there one? No. Yeah, we also identified a project, City of Madera, Cleveland Avenue. This is a planning study to look at the interchange and the intersection grade separation requirements for that particular area. So that's a $5 million project, but it would also include some improvements. We also are looking at, in this case, the city of Madera, Ellis Street. There are significant traffic issues associated with that area. So a $5 million project there. A $10 million project, bridge improvements at Gateway, as well as at improvements, corridor completion improvement for Road 28 in Tozier at $4.8 million. We're also looking at a $9.5 million improvement for the Westbury Bridge and about a $500,000 improvement at Yosemite and Tozier. And then in the rural area, we're looking at improvements to Avenue 12. We talked about a traffic calming complete streets project in that area, that segment of Avenue 12 within the retail area where right-of-way is constrained. It's not possible to expand and add lanes. So we're looking at ways in which we can calm traffic and reduce the speed of traffic, enhance the walkability of the corridor in that area between Road 36 and Road 38, provide for some enhanced safety for pedestrians, potentially look at consolidating some of the access to the facility so that it's user-friendly, people can walk to their retail establishment rather than getting in their car and doing so. So ways that we can calm traffic and enhance walkability, as well as biking. So that's a $5 million project. It would be one phase of a $20 million project. Also looking at other improvements along Avenue 12 to improve accessibility to the college as well as to the ranchos and to the city of Madera. There's other funding coming in from other funding sources. So we're looking at 4.2 million, 2 million, 2 million, and 2 million for each one of those projects on Avenue 12. And then finally, we're looking at safety and fire evacuation routes and projects and a planning study for the Oakhurst and North Fork Cascadel area. The county has specific fire evacuation and safety routes that they've identified in the past. And so $20 million would be allocated. The total cost right now is estimated around 48 million, but the planning study would help us refine what that actual cost is. But at least 20 million would be allocated to improving and starting to initiate some of those improvement projects in that area. That total comes to approximately $77 million of the 216.5 million that would be available over a 30-year period for this measure. Of course, we're hoping to look at an until ended by voters duration. And of course, whether it's a 30-year measure or an until ended by voters measure, there is the possibility with this funding and the time frame for the measure to potentially look at bonding and keeping some of these costs low instead of having to deliver them later on and have the cost inflate over time. So with that, I will turn it over to and ask the cities, the two cities and the county, if they have any additional comments, or MCTC, MCTA staff.
I think in terms of the city of Madera, if it's appropriate that I go, kind of one of the things that we obviously struggle with is Cleveland Avenue and the interchange. I think because that interchange obviously affects both the city of Madera, but also a lot of county residents that live just north of the city. There's several thousand people that live there, and I'm probably underestimating the number. That it's a very odd situation because you have a state highway probably about 200 feet to the west. You have 5 different road segments that meet at where we have a railroad crossing. The challenge with that intersection, well, there's a lot of challenges with it. The problem is that you have a lot of state agencies, a railroad right-of-way. We do not own the right-of-way to do anything, but part of the challenge is that we're struggling with is we know it's not the sexiest project to say, hey, community, help support this. We want to spend $5 million for a couple of improvements, and then we want to do a study. And we know that's not very sexy. The problem, though, is we have to start coming up with the design if we're serious about doing something with that intersection. That is one of the most challenging intersections we have in our community. And we feel that it would be appropriate to allocate some funds to at least determine if it's even feasible. If not, we can move on from it, and then we can focus our efforts on either a grade separation at Yosemite or somewhere south of that, or do we go further north to Ellis and do we put all of our eggs in that basket and propose a full-blown intersection or interchange at 99 in Ellis? Again, it's not an easy part of the community to travel. The other items we believe are fairly self-explanatory. We have Ellis, which is mostly in the county right now. Maybe a small portion of that's in the city, but I think most of that's in the county. We're proposing $5 million there. We're proposing a new bridge at Westbury. That bridge is going to be approximately $12.5 million. We have a little over 3 million right now, so our request would be 3.5 million. We have some improvements on Road 28, which is partially in the city, or it's mostly in the city. There's a couple of portions that are still in the county. We're proposing some improvements there, and then the intersection of Yosemite and Tozier. And so that rounds ballpark figure a little. It's $30 million, maybe just slightly north of that. So I think here probably the only one again that may not be as appealable to the voters would probably be the Cleveland Avenue interchange. However, it's one of those things that we think the community wants it. The problem is that they may not be patient enough and they may want it all now. That's a problem, that we don't have a good plan because it's such a difficult intersection to travel. So with that, that's all that I have from the city, unless Mayor or Ellen or Keith have anything to add.
Thank you.
I don't have anything.
I think as far as myself, this is Santos. This is looking a lot better than we were looking at before. So I concur with Arnoldo and our staff that this is looking really good. Thank you.
Thank you. The county, do you have any additional comments?
Thank you, Georgina. I think you certainly covered it pretty well. The one highlight that I still struggle a little bit is on the 41 project, and I mean, I think it's a good thing certainly to highlight and to point out here is on the 10.5 to Avenue 15 improvement, right? That's our goal, and we're on schedule to have that out and under construction in 2024. And so we've got a lot of funding allocated already, and so that's just a big highlight for us. Certainly the near term projects, again, you covered the Avenue 12 items, and getting some improvements and really leveraging our road impact fee program, which we do have a pretty aggressive impact fee program, as you can see from column G there on the funds that are bringing into the measure there. That, and then the emergency evac routes up in the Oakhurst North Fork area, right? We have some plans and specs already for improving Road 420, paving that all the way through, straightening that out. John West Road, we have a grant application that we have put in to try and secure at least the right of way to see John West connect into 222 up there. We've got 620 that we could look at, so there's a lot of work on those. There's the Oakhurst area plan identified a number of those, and so we'd be looking to leverage the Measure T dollars to try to build some of those out in the near term, and also in the Cascadel, North Fork area as well. So excited to try to get some funding to see those come to fruition. It's been a long time, so I think that about covers it. Unless Jared, you have anything else to add on that?
No, I think you covered it. Good job.
How about Chowchilla?
Yeah, no, kind of echoing what Matt said. I think you covered a lot of it very well. The projects that are listed here for Chowchilla are primarily focused with, increasing or improving circulation throughout the city, whether it's phase 2 of the roundabouts project or constructing an additional bridge to connect the east-west side, and other improvements that help circulation and pedestrian multimodal transit throughout the city. And so that's kind of where we focused our needs at.
I will note, and I forgot to note, that we have also scored all of these projects, given the scoring criteria, prioritization criteria that is in the prioritization study. So all of them have been input into well, they haven't all been input, but I did some of them manually. So I need to still put those in. About half of them are in the prioritization database, and the other half are not yet, but they will be in fairly quickly. But they've all been scored. They all score very well compared to one another. So I think that was a good thing. And compared to other projects in the database already. I wasn't able to get them into this because I received this late, and I wasn't able to merge the two spreadsheets.
I was just going to add on the east-west connection, the bridge or flyover, the importance of that as well for Chowchilla is not just circulation and connectivity, but also public safety improvements, because we do have don't have public safety fire PD on the east side, and sometimes the railroads gets blocked by the trains going by, and we don't have a quick, easy route to get to the east side of town for our public safety. So having that connection would be incredibly important for public safety, as well as the public safety improvements that would go along with the 23399 project as well, because there would be widening of the bridge or adding an additional bridge that does include public safety improvements and ADA improvements as well. So those are two important projects for the city of Chowchilla.
Very good. Thank you. Frank.
I got two questions. One, I'm not sure who I addressed this to. I think it's somebody at MCTC. On the connection of John West Road over to 222 at Bass Lake to give that whole development a second way in and out. Previously, we looked at trying to connect John West Road. One of the little spurs is called Taylor Mountain Court to Indian Springs Road, which goes down to the new Midtown connector that just went in. The property you would cross is called Friendship Ranch, and that's owned by my family. And I just wanted to reemphasize again, if ever you wanted to look at running across the side of our ranch to connect, we are absolutely willing to entertain that and even donate property to see that happen, to create that. And you can contact me separately if you'd like to. That's one. And the other was, is this the right time to add a request for a safety improvement to 41, or is that a different part of the meeting?
No, I think it's fine to suggest additional additions to the project list, of course.
Okay. I was at the CHP meeting at the station in Oakhurst this morning to welcome the new commander that just came in a few days ago. And I talked to the officers there. I'm retired out of law enforcement. So And they all unanimously agreed one of the most dangerous areas on Highway 41 up in the mountains is the Highway 41 at Road 416 intersection. There's a high number of accidents there. And it has to do with the angle of approach of Road 416 to Highway 41 being steep, where you drive uphill, that cars are pulling out into the traffic lane to see if it's safe to get onto the highway. And that's causing accidents, a high rate of accidents. And it's something I'd like to see it looked into. It could be a Caltrans combination county project together to maybe improve that or look at it and see if that's something that is even appropriate for Measure T funds to address.
Jared,
good.
and Jared, have you looked at that intersection at all? It's been along with Caltrans, Michael?
Yeah, hi, Georgina. This is Jared. Yeah, we have looked at that intersection, and we've already had conversations with both CHP and Caltrans on that intersection.
Great.
I know that there's some interim treatments that Caltrans was doing, but I do know that there was going to be an effort to, look further in how that could be reconfigured and what it would take to do that. So it's definitely on the radar. And like I said, I know maintenance and ops and traffic for Caltrans has been looking at it. So appreciate you bringing it up, Frank. And I do agree. So hopefully we'll be able to get something done there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Treber.
All I was going to say is that I'm glad this is recorded because I'll be reaching out to Frank on his offer there. So
Excellent. Very good. Thank
Please.
you.
Please do.
All right. Super. John Reed. John?
Yeah, I have to wait for him to get me. All right. A couple of smaller projects, which I think the section in getting boats in the mountain areas. There are two curves on Road 426 and 223 going between Oakhurst and North Fork that change radius in midstream. If anybody who's ever traveled them in the winter, when there's any snow on the ground, knows exactly what I'm talking about. And those curves should be straightened out so that they don't change radius. We've had every winter we get a lot of wrecks there because people are midstream, mid curve, and then it changes radius and they have to jerk and there's been several fatalities over the years on those two curves. I think that we could add those requiring the right of way, straightening those curves out. It would be a positive thing for gaining.
Very good.
Which two facilities did he say?
I said,
Go ahead.
Pardon me?
yeah, 223 is one that actually Jared and I have been discussing and looking at, and that I think we would look at trying to improve that as part of the Road 420 emergency evac route improvement there. That's a historically bad section there coming into Teaford. So.
And what was the other facility that he said?
426, I'm pretty sure.
426. Okay.
By the Llama Ranch.
Very good. All
By
right.
the Llama Ranch.
Llama Ranch. Thank you. Frank?
I just wanted to add to what John was saying. Yeah, there's a curve there by Llama Ranch, Teaford South area. It's actually super the opposite direction, just the way the curve. And it's, if you're going to North Fork from Oakhurst, it's a left turn. And if you hit ice, cars go right off the road and end up off the road there. I've actually taken the ambulance around that corner Coach 3 once at a 90-degree pitch where I was steering out the passenger's window before I actually got traction again. And you don't have to be going fast for that to happen. I'm not sure how it would be fixed because the actual road is angled the opposite direction you would normally go as you go around a curve. And so that really is a bad spot, especially in inclement weather. It's bad in general, though. I just wanted to agree.
Very good. Thank you. If there's no other comments, Georgina, it mentions to review and potential approval.
Yes.
Okay.
So approval would be of these short-term projects. They would be listed as the regional set of projects in the renewal plan, in the investment plan.
Okay. So if that's the case, I will accept a motion for action. Anybody, don't be shy.
I'll make
I
a
see.
motion to approve. Michael Lopez.
Okay, Michael, thank you.
Second.
And Bobby Kahn is a second. If there's anybody who does not want to approve the regional program project listing, please say so now. Hearing none, the motion is passed. Let's move on to public engagement, and that'd be item number 5. And I believe Carl.
Yes, Alex?
Yes, that's me. I think I have some slides coming up.
Okay.
You know what, Alex? I could not find your slides, so
Okay, I can share them.
that'd be
No
great.
problem.
Sorry.
If you can give me access to share. Awesome.
There you go.
You should be able to see my screen.
Yes, we see it. Perfect.
Okay. Oops. All right, community outreach. So I'm going to present just on the findings from the mailer that we sent out a few weeks ago. So just a reminder, this wasn't a scientific survey, it was just an intake of residents in the county. So we did send the county-wide mailer out to all residents, not just to all registered voters in the county. We included some information about Measure T, and then we also included an option to take a survey and either mail it back or take it online. Survey was offered to both English and Spanish. As of this past Monday, 426 people took the survey, which is great. And the survey is still online if anyone still does want to take it. And people were asked to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 the importance of the following buckets of items Measure T could potentially fund on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being a low priority for them and 5 being the highest priority. So the first one was kind of our fix potholes and repair deteriorating roads. You'll see here 73% people who did answer that question thought it was the highest priority, so rank that as a 5. And the light blue here is a low priority, then everything else in between. And this is our little scale over here. So kind of matching Tim's poll as well, as that's the highest priority amongst people who took the survey. The next one was reduced traffic congestion, a little more mixed here, 34% saw that as the highest priority, but not far behind. It was 20% saw it as still a high priority, and then 13% saw it as the lowest priority. Improve driver safety and highway traffic flow, again, 35% as their highest priority, 10% as the lowest priority. Expand programs to promote carpooling and ride sharing. 40% of the people who took the survey saw that as a low priority, again, matching what we saw in the scientific poll. And 11% saw it as the highest priority. Improve pedestrian safety and safe routes to school. 34% highest to 13% lowest. So a little bit of mixture, kind of, we saw one of those middle ground priorities. Improve bike lanes and trails. This almost looks like a perfect pie across the board. I thought that was interesting, visually at least.
Yes.
Keep transits fair and affordable. Just half the pie there. Half think it's, or 25% think it's highest priority, 25% think it's lowest. Expand transit routes. Again, seeing our kind of equal pie there. And expand programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. So again, 30% saw that as highest, 38% saw it as the lowest. And just to recap that, 73% saw the highest of the fixed potholes, highest ranking 34% reduced traffic congestion, and so on. So we're seeing it matched similarly to what we saw in the scientific poll. with expanding programs to promote carpooling, ride sharing, just that 11% highest priority. I did pull some comments from the survey. There wasn't open-ended. If you wanted to leave any comments, you were welcome to. We did receive a lot of comments, which is positive. I will pass those on to MCTC staff and we'll get them out to the agencies too. There's some very specific comments. People had very specific comments about even down to their own local street and road. So I will pass those along. So just sharing some, please fix the roads, tired of driving over potholes, both rural and on highways, repair the roads so it stops the damage to our precious vehicles. And then I'm a cycling enthusiast and would like to see more cycling routes and trails, and then kind of list the different areas. Going on, no more taxes. Don't ignore rural roads. We pay and vote taxes too. All students should have safe bike and pedestrian access. Our roads are atrocious. Just don't put band-aids on the potholes. And then, interesting enough, I know there was just a mention of Road 420 and about safety access. So that was just a snippet of the comments we got back. And just a reminder that this is still a live survey, and we'll keep it open as long as we need to, so that the community can continue to share their thoughts as needed to MCTC staff.
Very good. Thank you, Alex. Any questions of Alex? All right, super. So let's move on to next steps. And the next item would be staff items.
I got to get back to sharing my screen real quick here. Sorry. There we go. So staff items, the schedule, we have a few meetings left. Today, May 5th, we did review the poll results. We also approved the regional project priorities. We also reviewed the community engagement status. Next meeting, we'll continue to look at that survey that Alex just provided us with some input on. And we'll also start to discuss the implementing guidelines. We're looking now at really working with you to make sure that we identify anything that needs to go into the implementing guidelines rather than writing those with you. We're looking for input, what should be included. We will provide you with an outline of what we believe should be included in the implementing guidelines. In other words, how we are going to actually deliver the measure programs and subprograms. And what are the specific projects that should be incorporated? What are the requirements for financing? How do they get their funding? What role will the oversight committee have, et cetera? So all of those ideas, those issues, those requirements will go into those implementing guidelines. We'll provide you with an outline and then request that you provide us with your thoughts on what some of those requirements, eligible projects, et cetera, should be. We will continue to look at that on June 2nd, and then also start to look at the renewal plan itself in terms of an outline as well. Staff will be doing all of the report writing, putting the document together. VRPA will be working very closely with MCTA and MCTC staff to do that. And then we will be turning it over to TBWBH to make sure that it is all concise and that it's graphically displayed so that it's easy to read and legible, so that everyone can fully understand what is in the plan, making sure that it's presentable to the public. So we will be looking for you to help us with that outline, make sure that we have everything in that investment plan that needs to be there so that the public has the information they need to understand what the measure renewal is. And then that will be actually published as part of the ballot, if the Board of Supervisors agrees that it should be on the ballot. So with that, any questions related to the schedule?
All right, very good. Seeing and hearing none, our next meeting date will be May 19th.
Yes.
And we'll move on to public comment related to items not on the agenda. Seeing and hearing none, thank you so much, everybody, for your attention and participation, as always. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and have a great rest of the day.
Great job, Supervisor Poitras. This is a new record.
Great.
Before I started talking, it was 14 minutes early. I think my best was 12. So well done.
Hey,
Great,
there you go.
productive.
Thank
Very
you so much.
Very productive. It was great to hear everyone's input.
Yes.
Thank you, Rob.
All right.
Thank you.
Appreciate it,
Have a great
everybody.
weekend, everyone, after tomorrow.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.